everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I just want to tell you a little bit about Dr. McLaughlin. He is a neurosurgeon, author, and is the founder of Princeton Brain and Spine and Sports Medicine, where he practices. He is the author of a book called Cognitive Dominance, A Brain Surgeon's Quest to Outthink Fear, which can be purchased online at Amazon. He is an internationally recognized surgeon and author, and his work has been published in Business Insider, Fortune, Reader's Digest, Costco Magazine, and Fast Company. I will now hand it over to Dr. McLaughlin to begin one of his most popular lectures, Limitless, Living Your Limitless Life, A Brain Surgeon's Approach to Longevity.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to represent Mercer County Surgery Center, the #1 surgery center in New Jersey and a top 20 in the country. So it's a privilege to be here today. I love this talk because it has a lot of pearls for anybody that's looking to an eye towards longevity. And the talk was really inspired by a movie I saw, a Bradley Cooper movie called Limitless. Have you seen it? If you haven't, it's worth a watch. It's a story about a guy by the name of Eddie Mora, who's played by Bradley Cooper. And he's a struggling writer about to face unemployment, and he's getting dumped by his girlfriend. And he realizes that he has no future. And it all changed. It changes when he takes an untested drug given to him by his brother-in-law called NZT. And what NZT does for him in this movie is it gives him immediate clarity and focus and diligence and everything he needs to succeed. And he shifts his life into overdrive after taking this drug. He pens his first novel in a night. He rises to the top of Wall Street and he wins his girlfriend back. It's an amazing story. Could it possibly be true? Is there some type of a drug or compound out there that we could take that would help us have mental clarity and huge drive and success and knowledge? Well, the alchemists have been looking for that compound for thousands of years. In fact, they called it the elixir of life. And the elixir of life was something that would bestow upon anybody who found it health, wealth, knowledge, and longevity. And it's something that people have been searching for thousands of years. And I'm here today to tell you, I guarantee that something like this substance exists. And if you spend the next 47 minutes with me, you'll get a taste of it. It's not really a compound or a substance. It's more a methodology and a mindset. Would you like to get started on living a limitless life? Here's the one catch. It won't come without some commitment, but it's worth it. Let me tell you a story. Bill and Sandy were rushing to get out the door one morning in February. They were booked on a flight to Hawaii to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, and they were late. As Bill lugged the overstuffed suitcase to the top of the stairwell, the sole of his shoe caught the edge of Sandy's handbag, and it sent him tumbling down 7 steps. Instead of the taxi taking them to the airport, the ambulance took them to the hospital. In the emergency room, he was diagnosed with a hip fracture and a subdural hematoma. No Hawaii, no celebration, no anniversary. Did you know that falls are the #1 cause for loss of independence in people our age? That's just one important and useful safety tip that I'll share with you tonight. We'll get back to Bill's situation a little bit later. But first, show of hands. How many of you have more than one life? Anybody? See, what I've learned on my journey in medicine is that we are fragile and we break easily. So the first take-home point of the day, and write this down, hoping that you'll live a long life is not a strategy. Here is one. I'm going to speak to you today from my perspective as a neurosurgeon. I'll give you a peek into my world to see experiences that I've had in my professional and personal life that have shaped the way I think. Two of my many passions are caring for patients and reading. Both of them inspire me in unique ways. And it's my hope that by sharing from patient experiences and key books that I've read, that perhaps you can form a new framework of living that will lead you to a limitless life. So how does one start living a limitless life? A life of health, wealth, knowledge, and longevity. To me, it's a threefold process. First, you need to create new habits so you can grow in the right direction. Second, you need to care for your back and brain so that you can support the vessel that you live in. And finally, you need to curate your mind so that you maintain curiosity in your golden years and you discard thoughts and ideas that don't serve you anymore. So first, creating new habits so that you can grow in the right direction. The old Ben Franklin quote, first we make our habits and then our habits make us. It's a very interesting book that I came across by the name of The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And really what it is, it's a book about why habits exist and how they can be changed. You see, roughly 40% of the actions that we perform on a daily basis are not actual decisions. They're habits. And it's believed, and it makes sense, that habits emerge because the brain is looking for ways to conserve energy. Once a habit emerges, the brain stops working. So let's look at the anatomy of a habit. You know, I had a habit years ago of when I got called in to do an emergency operation, I would finish the operation and it'd be sometime like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'd be walking out to my car to drive home to catch a few hours of sleep before the next day. And I'd stop by the vending machine and I would buy 2 large servings of Cheetos, the fried kind, the really bad kind. And I love them. They're delicious. And it was my justification at the end of a stressful case, an emergency operation, a craniotomy on somebody, or an emergency spine procedure. It was my justification that, hey, you worked hard, you stressed out, now let's relax on the way home so you can get a little bit of sleep. So I'd put my money in, get those 2 bags of Cheetos, and on the drive home, I'd eat them. A habit is formed by a simple loop consisting of a cue, routine, and reward. And what drives the habit is a craving. So in my situation, my craving that led to the habit was the craving of relaxation. My cue was walking out of the hospital after a case. My routine was to get those Cheetos, and the reward was to feel relaxed along the way home. We have so many bad habits out there. Here's a homework assignment for you. The next time you're listening to the radio or on television watching some program, take a look at all the advertisements that are targeted to help us with our bad habits. Financial woes and credit cards, all the habits on food and diets. It's insane how many bad habits we all have. And to change a bad habit, we have to disable that habit loop that's been perpetuated, or we're doomed to repeat it. You have to take control and recognize the loop and what drives it. If you change that habit, take some energy and willpower, you can convert your bad habits. And I came across a quote recently which really rang true for me, and I'd like to share it with you. It's by Epictetus, the known Stoic philosopher. And what he said, and what I've grasped onto, which really helps me break bad habits, is bad habits must first be weakened and then obliterated. So I'll tell you what I did. I knew that habit was bad. I knew having 2 bags of Cheetos was totally unnecessary. I had already eaten dinner and I was going home and I was just gorging myself to feel relaxed. So what I did was, instead of just trying to stop it, I wasn't strong enough to do that. So what I did was I opted to get 1 bag of Cheetos and 1 bag of almonds. And that worked for a while because I still had the crunchiness, I had the saltiness, just didn't have 2 bags of Cheetos on the way home. I was eating something a little bit healthier. And then a little farther down, as I had gotten a little bit more willpower, I went to just the almonds. And then I finally kicked the habit by just saying, I'm just going to walk outside. I'm going to get some fresh air. I'm going to feel the same thing I do in the relaxation of the cool, crisp evening air when I climb into my car. And I beat that bad habit. So the power of routine is vital to developing rewarding habits. If you can start good habits yourself, it's a great lesson for your kids and your family. You know, when I coach my youth wrestlers, I tell them, like, make your bed first thing in the morning. There's a wonderful book by Admiral McLaughlin about making your bed and how that sets the tone for your entire day. Drink water, not soda, when you have a craving. Teaching small good habits to children and yourself will lead to longer term and limitless impact. So when you get bored, what do? Do you go to the fridge? No. Take a step outside. Walk around the block. Let that craving pass and create the cue routine reward for a new healthy habit. Recognize the loop and replace the routine with something healthy. You can do it. Now, remember what I said earlier, that falls are the #1 cause of loss of independence for people our age? At the very core of living a limitless life is to be conscientiously aware of the ordinary and avoidable hazards in our environment. If you want to live a limitless life, you have to prevent self-inflicted wounds. How? Try creating this new habit today. When you go home, take a moment and really look at your home environment. Scan around for trip and fall hazards. I guarantee you they're out there. Look at your stairwell. Is there a set of shoes there? Is there some laundry that you're trying to leave to take up when you go? That's a hazard. Do you hold on to the banister when you go down the steps? Are you steady on your feet? Are you looking at your phone while you're going down the steps? That is an avoidable hazard for your environment. I tell you, I see people in the emergency room all the time who are looking at their phone, who fell down steps or walked into something. It's a very common occurrence. What about shoes? You know, commonly I have people that come to me with falls from sandals or falls from high-heeled shoes. Having the right footwear is so important. It's really helpful for you to look at your shoes that you have in your house and take a really good assessment of what's something that's a fall risk. I love to wear sandals too in the summertime, but I don't wear them on the stairs. They're dangerous, unhealthy pieces of equipment in your house. And if you have loved ones who are elderly, look at their shoes and figure out a way to take them shoe shopping for their birthday or for Mother's Day or Father's Day, and get them some healthy, balanced shoes that will help them keep their balance and their equilibrium when they're walking. Manage other risks in the house, like step stools. They're dangerous. For an elderly person, there should be no step stool in their house. Throw rugs, similarly, commonly catch people's feet, similar to what happened to Bill. Keep an eye out for these things. And then lastly, find night lights in dark areas of your hallways, and get them. You can buy a 6-pack of these little night lights for a couple dollars at Costco, and they're well worth it, because as you get older, your iris doesn't contract as quickly, and you can't see what you need to see when you transition from a lighted area to darkness quickly. So reaching out and getting those kinds of lights are really, really important. So we talk about the first thing, create a good habit. The good habit is to look around your house and make sure that you have a healthy environment and that you're not creating any self-inflicted wounds. What's the next step? Caring for your back and your brain. This is a book that I picked up many years ago from my colleague, Stuart Idelson. And Stuart is an orthopedic surgeon down in Boca Raton area. And he wrote this book, and it's kind of like a user's manual for your brain and your spine, your neck and your spine. And I love this one quote that he had in it. In order to save your aching neck and back, and I'm going to add your brain to this, you must first understand it. And, you know, Americans typically take better care of their cars than they do their bodies. You almost regularly will take your car in for a service interval, and you almost regularly do not go to see a doctor for checkups. So it's truly important for you to do this. And what I'll say about it is, you know, there are certain things you need to do. Respect your spine and brain for their important roles. Protect your spine from injury, and nourish your spine and brain for your life. So let's first talk about the spine, and I'll give you some anatomy lessons on the spine. Remember, the lumbar spine, the low spine right here, is a load-bearing organ, basically. The bones are wide, and they allow for weight-bearing. The bones in the middle of your spine are more rigid, and they have some load-bearing, but they also are structural to support your spine. And then the neck bones up here, the cervical spinal vertebral bodies, they are more specialized for movement. So we have 33 bones stacked like a skyscraper that allows us to hold our brain and our head up and allows us to move and watch out for hazards as we move through the environment. But remember, bone is a tissue. It's just like skin or other organs. If we don't exercise, if we don't stress it, it can weaken, and we can get these things called compression fractures or osteoporotic compression fractures. When these happen, they can be a source of terrible pain, and sometimes we even need to operate on them. The image on the right is an image of some needles that have been placed in this bone, and we're injecting cement into the bone to reestablish this bone's ability to bear weight. So remember that bone is a tissue. It needs to be strengthened. That's why exercise is a good way of strengthening bones. That's why astronauts tend to get osteoporosis, and they have to exercise a lot when they're in space because there's no stress on their bones and they can be subject to osteoporosis. If you exercise your body and you put stresses on it, the bones will become stronger and you're less likely to get this type of a compression fracture. So let me take you through some anatomy. This is a normal, healthy spine. You can see the bones are like these square building blocks of honeycombed areas here. And between the bones are these discs. I like to think of them as shock absorbers. So this is the disc, and this is the vertebral body. Now, the vertebral body is like a block of bone, and the disc is the shock absorber that allows the bones to shift and move when you are moving your head around. So on the side view, you can again see this is the box of bone that has these honeycombed trabeculations, which are blood cell making and also structural. And then the disc, which is the shock absorber. Now behind these structures sits the spinal cord. Down below what you see, this is a worn out, dehydrated, very, very overused spine. And you can see that there's degeneration of the discs here. There's drying out of the discs. And you can see on the side view, there are some bone spurs. You can see some changes in that trabeculation. The honeycombing is gone here. That's because the bones are becoming sclerotic and they're hardening because the discs are not able to absorb those blows, the pounding. And so the bone has to start absorbing that, and it forms a reactive tissue. And all of that leads to bone spurs compressing the spinal cord, narrowing the spinal cord, pinching nerves, and causing pain and decreased function. So what do we do? Look back here. You can see the balance of the muscles. These are the muscles that attach to the spine. So what do we do to keep those bones healthy and those discs and shock absorbers? Think of your spine as almost like a tent pole that's holding up a gigantic circus tent. And think of the muscles and the ligaments as like the guy wires that hold that tent down. If you can keep those guide wires flexible and taut and balanced, then that pole won't shift and you won't get degeneration. You'll have balance and you won't have scoliosis and degenerative changes of your spine. So by stretching, by doing exercises like yoga and routine stretching, like Pilates and strengthening, things that will keep your muscles activated, those are the types of exercises that will help balance your spine out and allow those bones to function in a normal way. You know, when I'm operating, before I go into a surgery, which is going to put me in a position for a long period of time, I'm stretching my neck, I'm moving my arms and my shoulders around, I'm trying to keep loose. Whenever you can, try and keep those bones and joints loose and stretch out your muscles to keep those joints free and easy. They need motion. What else can you do? Posture is critical. So getting the right desk chair so that your chest is proud and your computer's at eye level. Standing with your shoulders back so that you can balance your head out. You know, think of your head as a 10-pound bowling ball. And if you constantly leaning your head forward, you're basically putting all this force on your back muscles to hold it up. Think about the balance you have when you bring your shoulders back. Have you ever put like something heavy on a hand truck? You notice that if you balance that hand truck on the wheels perfectly, you can hold that heavy object with 2 fingers. But if you lean the hand truck forward, your muscles have to hold it in place. Same thing with your neck. If you keep your head in balance, your muscles are going to be more relaxed. You're going to be less likely to go into spasm. And lastly, people always ask me, like, well, what kind of a pillow should I use? You know, I just bought this $200 pillow. It's not the cost of the pillow. It's not the type of the pillow. It's the amount of filling that the pillow takes to keep your head in the proper position. When you sleep, you want your head to be neutral. You don't want it tilted like you're talking on your phone. You want it neutral. So if you have big, broad shoulders, you may need 2 pillows, or you may need a pillow and a towel, or something to keep your ear and your head in a neutral position and not tilting. If you like to sleep on your back, you generally don't want to have a pillow that causes you to be in flexion. You want a pillow that keeps your head neutral. So really, you need to try these pillows out. You need to have your significant other take a look as well to tell you whether your head's tilted or not. And that's going to put you in a better ergonomic situation for sleeping. So let's move to the brain. I love these pictures. This is a picture of the brain. This is an anatomical specimen. You're looking at the most complex machinery in the universe. 100 trillion synapses, 100 billion cells. It's remarkable. And this is an anatomical specimen. I want to take you for a tour around the brain and its structures. And I want to tell you that I'm going to be showing you some anatomical and some pathological specimens here. And so the warning is you may see some graphic images here. I want you to know that I'm showing you these images, as I talked about before, because I want you to not shoot yourself in the foot. Self-inflicted wounds cause a lot of death and disability in this world. And we're going to be seeing specimens, brain specimens of people who have had traumas, avoidable traumas, preventable traumas, and they've passed away from them. And I show them to you because I want their life to be a lesson for all of us to help people in the future and prevent these things from happening. So let's do these people who have passed away honor, and let's pass on the lessons that we've learned from them to our loved ones and to the people around us. So this is a side view of the brain. This is the frontal lobe here. This is the parietal lobe, and this is the occipital lobe. You see the cerebellum, which is the coordination center of the brain. And here's the brainstem. That's the basic machinery that keeps us alive and breathing. All these structures are vital, obviously. Our brain is protected by a helmet. starts with a scalp and then a very firm bone that has 2 layers. Then it has an outer leathery surface called the dura. And then we have what's like a Dr. Scholl's protective fluid between the brain and the skull called the subarachnoid space and the cerebrospinal fluid. That space that sits right here is like a cushion. So if you have a head injury, the kinetic energy of that blow doesn't go directly to your brain. It gets dampened by the fluid in this pocket, and then if it's bad enough, it's transmitted to the brain. So we have a great protective mechanism in place already to protect our brain. And yet, unfortunately, we still insult our brain at times when we don't need to. Let's talk about this. So first of all, again, a little more anatomy. Frontal lobe involved with executive function, planning. These are the kinds of structures that help us think about long-term goals and how we act in the world. The parietal lobe helps us with understanding where our body is in space and time. It gives us sort of big picture concepts. And the occipital lobe is our visual cortex that helps us see the world and perceive it. Temporal lobe, more for memory and speech. And the cerebellum, as I said, is our coordination center. We have networks that are in place, literally networks that help us be alert, help us be on guard, help us to do the things that we need to live in this world and to perpetuate our species. And these networks are composed of gray matter and white matter. The white matter sits under the surface of the brain. That's the Verizon network that connects all of these cells together. And the gray matter is sort of the thinking cap on the surface. And the gray matter and the white matter converse with each other so that we can interact with the world. So our brain is constantly processing information, things that we're looking at. And this is a good example of how our gray matter and our white matter interact with each other. Here's your test. Number 1, read these colors aloud. Pretty straightforward, right? Black, yellow, blue, orange, red, pink. All right, now pay attention. Name the colors. A little bit harder now. We got to think, right? Okay, the words don't match the color, and we want to name the colors. Purple, brown, orange, blue, green, blue. That's a hard one in the lower corner. All right, so that gives you an idea of how those areas of your brain are working and conversing with each other. And that's why when we get a concussion, that network is down. That's why it's so important. You know, the olden days, we show me how many fingers do I have? That doesn't check for brain processing, that test. Tests like word discrimination, word recall, those are the kinds of tests that will help us in assessing an athlete or someone who's had a concussion, whether their network's down. And if you can't remember, 6 words on the side of a football field, you can't play in a game, you can't get in a car and drive, and you need to rest and let your machinery recover and come back online. That's why it's so important to do these tests and to check brain processing. For any of you history buffs out there, this is a picture of Harrison Marlin. This is a pathologist in Newark, New Jersey, in the city morgue, who was the first person who described dementia pugilistica, boxers' dementia. And he was really the first person to start talking about brain injury with repetitive concussions. I remember my grandfather, who lived in West Orange, used to tell me about Dr. Martlin's studies years and years ago, and how he did autopsy studies and what it showed. What it showed was, here's a normal cross-section of a brain, and you can see the white matter here, and you can see the gray matter, these strips along the surface. Remember our thinking cap here, and this is our Verizon network. You can see how robust it is in a normal brain, as opposed to someone who's been boxing or suffering from chronic traumatic encephalopathy. They've lost the ribbon of cortex around their brain, and their white matter tracks are dramatically diminished. And what we see on a microscopic level are these little dark spots, which is a buildup of an abnormal protein called tau. This is called in scientific circles a tauopathy. And what we see, it typically manifests itself in the temporal lobes. That's why memory is one of the first things that's affected by this. So We can stop insulting our brain by not boxing. Boxing, I have to tell you, is not a healthy sport for your brain, and I don't endorse it in any way. The goal of the sport is to give somebody a concussion. Now, come on. We've evolved long enough to say that's not the right thing to do, and we know what happens with brain injury. So that's very important. Here is another example. Remember I said that there's some fluid here between the brain surface and the skull. Well, that's very protective at times, but unfortunately, sometimes when the brain has a severe head injury, there are blood vessels that can tear in this space, and they can form this type of a blood clot called an epidural hematoma. This is a blood clot that's formed on the outside of the on the inside of the skull, on the outside of the covering of the brain. This is the covering called the dura, which is a leathery pouch. And you can see that it's pushing on the brain, and this person succumbed to this epidural hematoma. This was a skier who wasn't wearing a helmet. Now, come on, when we're participating in sports that have high velocity, sledding, biking, we need to wear helmets. It diffuses the kinetic energy. This is a preventable injury right here. Here's another one right here. This is a subdural hematoma. So this is a blood clot that formed under this leathery pouch on the brain surface. You can see this is dark blood. This is more acute blood, and this is chronic blood that's been there. And this person also succumbed to their subdural hematoma, a preventable accident. So helmets are huge. Not only are they huge, you need to revisit the helmets frequently. As if you have young kids, they outgrow their helmets very quickly. At least once a year, check them, make sure that they sit properly. Make sure the kids that haven't had a fall on them. If you have a helmet that's had a couple of blows to it, it's not a functional helmet anymore. It needs to be replaced. So check it out and make sure people are wearing the right helmets. If you go on a ski trip, I mean, you shouldn't step on a slope without a helmet at this point. In this day and age, it's something you have to do. What else can we do to prevent brain injury? Well, this is a person who had poor dental hygiene and developed a tooth abscess. And that tooth abscess progressed to bacteria in their bloodstream, and ultimately that blood went to their brain, because your brain gets 1/5 of your whole cardiac output. It went to their brain, and the bacteria lodged in the brain, and it formed a brain abscess. And from that brain abscess, they developed a seizure, and then from that seizure, they died. They died from status epilepticus, an uncontrolled seizure. Something that could have been prevented by simple dental hygiene, getting your teeth cleaned once every 6 months to a year, making sure you don't have any abscesses. There's another preventable illness. This is pneumococcal meningitis. You can see that there's pus on the surface of the brain here, and pus on the interhemispheric fissure where the two hemispheres are. Pneumococcal vaccination in people over 60 or people that don't have a spleen can prevent this. It's a vaccine that you can take and cure and prevent this from ever happening. Here's another person that's had a hypertensive hemorrhage. This is a blood clot in the deep area of the brain that controls fine motor movements. It's an area called the basal ganglia, and this person had uncontrolled high blood pressure. A simple blood pressure medication would have prevented this stroke. This is like basically the pipes in your house getting too much water pressure and blowing. That's exactly what happened in this person's brain. And in this person, you can see this wedge of brain, which looks jelly-like. It's dying brain. It's brain that had a stroke because they had high cholesterol, and one of the pipes got clogged with that cholesterol and couldn't send blood flow to this area. And that's why it almost looks like a river delta, because everything beyond the blood vessel took out that wedge of the river delta, and they succumbed to that stroke. Preventable illness with a simple anti-cholesterol medication. So these are the kinds of things that we can prevent insults to our brain. I'm sure many of you came here to see what you could do to try and prevent Alzheimer's disease or minimize it. This is a healthy brain. You can see the gyri and the sulci. The gyri are the soft, curvy edges, and the sulci are the crevices in the brain. And you can see here's an Alzheimer's brain where there's atrophy of the gyri and the ribbons and huge crevices in the sulci. This is another insult to the brain, alcoholism. Alcohol is a neurotoxin. And you can see here, I'm going to move my window here for a second. You can see this is a healthy cerebellum, the coordination center of the brain, and this is an alcoholic cerebellum. You can see that the brain cells in the cerebellum here have atrophied, and the spaces are much wider, and that's because alcohol damages brain cells. Preventable. What do we know about Alzheimer's disease? Well, we do know that people with Alzheimer's disease, it seems like it's a disease of inflammation or oxidation. Oxidation in the brain, think of it as like rust. What we see are these neurofibrillary plaques and tangles, which lead to cell death. And this is a high microscopic view of what we see in a patient with Alzheimer's disease. And we know that in patients that have Alzheimer's disease, we measure the level of what's called free radicals, which are these ions that go around almost like pinballs, bouncing into cells and damaging them. We know that they also, people with Alzheimer's disease, have high levels of antioxidants. So their brain is trying to capture these radicals and neutralize them, but unfortunately, it's not effective. So what can we do to minimize our chances of Alzheimer's disease? Incorporate healthy habits and routines. The first thing you can do is dietary, okay? Because the precursors to those neurofibrillary tangles and plaques are trans acids, fatty acids that we get in our fried foods. So if we can minimize our fried foods, we're going to decrease the precursors to those types of compounds. So we can monitor our health with cholesterol checks, blood sugars, and frequent blood pressure checks. You can get a blood pressure machine now on Amazon for $100 and check your blood pressure once a day to see what it's like. It can give you an idea if you're having any trends. What else can we do? We can eat foods that are healthy for our brain and our body. For instance, foods that have probiotics. We're realizing that our gut has a tremendous impact on our health. And if you can maintain the normal flora of your gut with proper probiotics that we find in yogurts, that will help us. That'll help us absorb nutrients and not have injury to our bloodstream. We can take dietary intake like berries, which have free radical scavengers, and resveratrol, which also finds these radicals that are damaging cells, neutralizes them. We see some of this in red wine, but again, to moderation, 1 glass, 2 glasses maximum. Beyond that, the neurotoxic effects of alcohol is going to damage the brain. Dark chocolate, another one that has resveratrol. These are all things that can help us manage the free radicals. Skipping those trans fatty acids and fried food and switching to a Mediterranean diet, a diet rich in nuts and great fruits, avocados, polyunsaturated fats, and grains, critical for our health. We know that the blue zones, where people are 10 times more likely to live to 100, these are the kinds of diets they have. Can we supplement our diet to help our health? Yes, there are clearly some vitamins like vitamin E, which is an antioxidant. You can get, and generally vitamin E is best taken through nature, through foods like berries and nuts. B-complex vitamins are good for nerve repair. A supplement called nicotinamide helps with our mitochondria, which are our powerhouses of our cells. Vitamin D, another nutrient that helps with our bone strength, which we need to take into our elderly golden years. Fish oil, another antioxidant, which keeps the free radicals down. And lastly, folate, which helps with spine development, particularly in pregnant women. These are all helpful supplements. What about water, the most important nutrient you can possibly have? We are being targeted by so many companies that are trying to get us to drink things that do not have our best health and interest at stake. Water is by far the best nutrient you can possibly take and maintain hydration so that your cervical discs and your lumbar discs can pull in that water and be better shock absorbers. It's really important for you to drink water and to have a good habit of choosing water as your number one form of hydration. What about exercise? The scan on your left shows blood flow after after no exercise, and the one on the right shows blood flow after exercise. We see that 20 minutes of exercise will boost our blood flow to our brain. It's also going to strengthen our heart. It's going to strengthen our bones and our muscles. And we know that taking strong bone mass and strong muscle mass into our golden years is one of the highest predictors for longevity. You know it. You know you think clearer after an exercise, right? I've never talked to anybody who doesn't feel that neural rush. And it also helps us with something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Exercise causes the brain to release this protein, which is like a fertilizer for your brain. So it's important to incorporate regular exercise in your daily routines. Sleep needs to be considered a nutrient. You know, your mind is not inactive when you're sleeping. It's actually doing a lot of processing. It's doing a lot of pruning. And if you don't get adequate amounts of sleep, your memory is going to suffer. You're going to have increased levels of cortisol, which is a compound of hormone. It's bad for your bones and bad for your heart. So maintaining regular sleep and more of a circadian rhythm, in other words, a sleep pattern it's based around lightness when you're awake and darkness when you're asleep, definitely going to help you. We've been doing this for thousands of years. We're genetically programmed to sleep when it's dark and to be awake when it's light. If you're going to try to alter Mother Nature, you're fighting a very, very powerful and helpful mechanism for our survival. So sleep is critical. Generally, the amount of sleep is 6 to 8 hours. People will vary in their need, but in general, nobody does well under 6 hours of sleep. All right, so we've talked a lot about creating new habits, and we've talked a lot about caring for your brain and spine. These are all what I would call left hemisphere things. Left hemisphere is the fact-based, logical, step-by-step, methodical part of your brain. Now I want to go right brain, okay? The right brain, the right hemisphere is the part of your brain that sees the big picture, that sees meaning, and that integrates our world in stories and in big picture ideas. And it really is the part of your brain that gives you meaning and interprets stories in a way that we can live our lives. So now I want to switch gears and I want to talk about your mind. I want to talk about a book that was a very powerful book for me. It was called The Noticer by Andy Andrews. And this is a book that I love. I shared this book with my kids and my mom and dad and my wife. I loved it. And Andy Andrews has a quote in it that I live by, and that is, if you are alive, then your life's purpose is not complete. Now, everyone, right now, take a big, deep breath. What is that proof of? You're alive. If you're alive, your life's purpose is not complete. And the way we realize our life's purpose is with perspective. So, one of the stories that Andrews tells that I love in this book is the story about the best being yet to come. It's the story of Norman Borlaug. So Norman Borlaug, you don't know who he was. He was a botanist, and he saved 2 billion lives. Never heard of him? He won the American Presidential Medal of Freedom. He's won multiple awards. And what he did was he designed a drought-resistant, disease-resistant dwarf wheat that grows in the desert. And it's been projected that his discovery saved 2 billion lives. But, you know, as I say, your perspective is really important way to look on the world. And Yeah, did Norman Borlaug save 2 billion lives? Maybe in some way he did. But was it Norman Borlaug or was it Henry Wallace, who was the vice president of the United States, who appropriated the funds for Norman Borlaug to do the research? You see, Henry Wallace, when he was a kid, he had an Iowa State student take him for nature walks. And that Iowa State student taught him a love of nature and the power of botany. And so when Henry Wallace became a politician and came into power, he knew the geopolitical power of botany and how it could change the world. So it was a priority for him to get the funds to botanists to do this kind of research to help populations of people on the earth that needed food. So was it Norman Borlaug that saved those 2 billion lives? Or was it Henry Wallace? Or was it Henry Wallace's Iowa State student who used to take him for walks when he was a little boy? You see, Henry Wallace was at Iowa State, and he was living there because his father was a professor there. And his father asked an Iowa State student, a gentleman by the name of George Washington Carver, to take his son on some nature walks. So George Washington Carver took Henry Wallace on the walks and taught him the importance of botany. And we all know who George Washington Carver was. He developed 200 different had botany discoveries and was a remarkable individual in botany and the sciences. So was it Henry Wallace that saved those 2 billion lives? Or was it George Washington Carver? Now, I don't know if you know the story of George Washington Carver, but George Washington Carver's mother was a woman who lived on a plantation in Missouri, which was a free state at the time, right around the time of the Civil War. And George Washington Carver's mother was friends with the people that owned this state. And they lived on the property and they did farm the land. Well, one night some raiders came, and when George Washington Carver was just a baby, an infant, these raiders came and they burned the whole farm down. They stole all the horses and they stole George Washington Carver's mother and the infant. And when the owner of the plantation came back, he jumped on his only horse left and chased the raiders down for 3 days and found them and said, "Look, I'll give you my only horse. Let the woman go and give us the baby. Let him free. You got what you want." Well, they had already unfortunately murdered George Washington Carver's mother, but they took the sack that they had with them and they threw it out to the owner of the plantation. And in that sack was George Washington Carver, the infant. And that farmer who owned the plantation took that baby home and raised him with his wife to be the man that he was. So was it George Washington Carver who saved those 2 billion lives? Or was it the farmer who chased those raiders and was able to at least save George Washington Carver's mom, save George Washington Carver from the raiders? You never know what one action will do and what the impact on that world will be. And as long as you're breathing, your purpose is still incomplete. So as a coach, I love to ponder what walking into a wrestling room one day and telling one kid one little tidbit, what that might do, what impact that might be. Is it, the rule, hey, on time is late. You should always be 15 minutes early to wrestling practice. Or what is it that I'll tell them today? What positive attitude or what will I pass on to them that will ultimately help them in some way, shape, or form to live the life they want to live and live their dreams and maybe change the world in a positive way. So it's important for us to stay creative in our years, all of our years, because we never know what the ripple effect of that might be. So let's recap. What is the magical compound that leads us to a life of knowledge, health, wealth, and longevity? Well, first of all, it's creating new habits and passing them on so you grow in the right direction. It's caring for your back and your brain so you can preserve the vessel that does the work. And it's curating your mind and filling it with positive thoughts and attributes and getting rid of old ideas that don't serve you anymore. Those are the keys and the methods and the methodology for you to live a limitless life. First, you make your habits, and then your habits make you. In order to save your aching back and neck and brain, you must first understand it. And if you are alive, then your life's purpose is not complete. So what I'll do now is I'd like to take some questions, and then I'll close with a short challenge.
Dr. McLaughlin, are you able to see the questions? Sometimes I have to take back remote control access to allow you that.
I see them.
Okay, great.
If you have a test for osteoporosis and it comes back okay, is that a sufficient test to that you have healthy bones? The answer to that question is yes. There are some very, very sensitive tests for osteoporosis, and your primary care doctor can order those tests. It looks at the concentration of cortical bone in your femur, in your spine, and in your pelvis, and it gives you a number. It can give you a number as normal or within normal limits. It can give you an idea that you might be mildly low, something called osteopenic, which means bone cells a little bit low, or osteoporosis. And based upon that, your treatment can be tailored to what you need. Now, even if you come back with a test that doesn't say you have osteoporosis or osteopenia, still important to exercise your bones. Still important to put stress on them because you want to take as much bone mass into your golden years as possible. It's going to decrease your chances of having a fracture when you fall. So the next question is, does the test include your spine? Yes, it does. It looks at your spine. Another question, would vitamin B help nerve damage from a brachial plexus injury? And the answer is, I believe it does. There are some class 3 studies. When I say class 3, I mean that they're not the greatest scientific studies, but they're all we have at this time to look at this. And we do recommend supplements for brachial plexus injury. You gotta be careful, you can't take too much. You can get neuropathies or injury to nerve with too much. But the answer is yes. The answer is vitamin B complex would be a good supplement for you to take if you have a nerve injury or a neuropathy. I'm in my early 40s and noticed that my brain's becoming foggy and forgetful over the past years. Is it a normal part of aging? Can we only slow down instead of reversing brain fog? I'm getting rid of my many bad habits and to take care of my brain. Is coffee good or bad? Okay, great questions, Zia. Those are great questions. Is coffee good or bad? Sure, coffee in moderation can help your mental acuity. No question about it. Type faster and with less errors with 2 cups of coffee on board. Now, beyond that, you can have anxiety from it, so you have to be careful. The best way that you can strengthen your brain for future, just like exercising your bones, is to exercise your brain. They've done studies about something called cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve is your brain's capacity for knowledge. And so every time you read a book, every time you learn a new game, pick up a chess board, pick up a puzzle, memorize a word or definition, practice spelling a word. Anytime you pick up a new skill, you're exercising your brain. And there are a number of studies that show that sometimes pathologists will look at a brain that's in the pathology lab and say, oh, this person, they must have had Alzheimer's disease because I see a lot of atrophy on their brain. And the history is actually that the patient had no signs of Alzheimer's disease at all because they carried a high IQ into their golden years. And that high IQ is sort of a buffer. It's like a safety zone for you. So best thing I could tell you is to, if you're not a reader, become a reader. It's probably the best way to develop your neural connections and neural networks. Start slowly. Audiobooks can help. Whenever you're driving in the car, keep the music to a minimum and books to a maximum. Those are all things that can help you. Another question. Can you tell us about your book and the process of writing a book? Well, that was the reach for me. The thing I wanted to do was challenge myself, was to tell my stories of all my patients that I've had and what I've learned from this amazing experience. And as a neurosurgeon, you know, I experienced a lot of stress and fear. And how do I deal with it? And is it something that's transferable to the lay public? So the challenge for me was to stitch the stories into a coherent, logical process for learning how to deal with fear better. And I was fortunate enough to have a great co-writer who helped me do that. And I'm thrilled to have launched the book, because I do think that the concept of cognitive dominance, which is enhanced situational awareness that facilitates rapid and accurate decision making, is something that's transferable to everybody. So I appreciate that question, and thank you. I think I have time for just one more. What's your guidance on teens playing tackle football? My answer to that is, I believe that high school and youth football is safe, provided the proper safety mechanisms are in place, provided proper equipment is in place. We have no evidence that people who played high school football have an incidence of dementia or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. We know that professional football players do. We're not sure about college, but clearly on the high school and the youth level, I think it's healthy. I think we have a childhood obesity epidemic. We've got to get kids out playing any sport they possibly can play, with the exception of boxing. And I would say that I think it's safe with a proper supervision and proper equipment. I wish I could answer everybody's calls. I'm sorry. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If you can keep an eye out for other talks that I'll be giving similar to this one. I want to thank Mercer Bucks Orthopedics and the Mercer County Surgery Center for this opportunity. And I want to leave you all with a challenge. Jen, can you give me the next slide, if you just advance the last slide? So final exam. What are you going to do in the next 24 hours to make a difference here? Because the only purpose of a speech is to change the world. And I want to change the world. So what are you going to do differently? Just knowing this information isn't enough. Maybe a low-level challenge might be to go and share some of these stories, or go to your house and make those habit changes to minimize hazards. Maybe a mid-level change might be to buy one of the books I talked about, The Noticer, Save Your Aching Back and Neck, The Power of Habit, or Cognitive Dominance, and read them and really focus on making some changes in your life. Or do you want to do a high-level change? If you want a high-level change, I'm happy to help you, but it's going to require commitment. So the challenge for a high-level change, if you really want a high-level change, I want you to email me between 5 and 7 a.m. tomorrow. My email address is brainspine.md@gmail.com. BRAINSPINE.MD@gmail.com. And tell me those words. I want to make a big change. I'll be happy to coach you in making a big change for you to live a limitless life. Thanks for your time today. God bless, and hope to see you again soon.